This is not just a reactionary rebuttal against the whole Mojang lazy argument that's circulating right now. Instead, the aim of this video is to offer a different perspective on Minecraft's development to allow you to perhaps consider some other opinions and information and provide you with some that perhaps you didn't even know yet. We will be breaking down Mojang's development priorities, and the point of that is to create meaningful discussion, not just another angry argument about our beautiful block game we all share. Additionally, this is just one perspective on Minecraft development. There are two sides to every issue, but this one needs to be heard the most right now, so sit back, grab a snack, and let's discuss another perspective on why Minecraft updates feel different right now. First though, Mojang is not lazy. Why did we even assume that at the start? Anyway, yes, Mojang might not be lazy. Obviously, there's no way to know for sure, as we don't actually work at Mojang and don't have the secret scoops the developers do. They could spend all day playing pool and then 10 minutes at the end of the day desperately coding in a brand new feature. However, instead of trying to guess on something that is so non-transparent, let's instead make inferences from all of the development that is done publicly for the game. Public development includes big things like game updates and announcements to smaller things like developer tweets and screenshots. We can also make some inferences from those in the community that are able to have an even closer look at Minecraft's development than others, such as modders and data miners, and those who can interact all the way down to the code level for the game. So it is a given that in the community's eyes, Minecraft updates have generally been degrading in quantity and in quality. We got the Nether update 3.5 years ago, and that was quite a large and well-received update that literally revamped the Nether dimension and made it actually worth going to for several different reasons. It was also the perfect update, perfect being in quotes, which we'll go into later, where it wasn't split into multiple parts and the community simply got a good update with lots of fresh, good content. So what has happened to Mojang since then? Why haven't they been able to achieve that kind of update quality with every update since 1.16? Are they just lazy? Have the developers simply gotten satisfied with making a good update once and are now making lame updates? Well, it's easy to think that, but maybe not. Perhaps the reason is that Mojang is actually working harder in ways that might surprise you, but after this discussion might make some sense. Let's get into it and break down these priorities, because what is Mojang doing then? I mean, surely they can't be working harder when we're getting less content in the game updates. Well, okay, they'd be probably working the same amount as they have done in previous years. We have no evidence to say they have a lot more resources or more efficiency in the development process, but still, we have been getting less content, so what gives? Well, consider this. Mojang is working harder, but not on features. Wait, what? How can Mojang not work on features? That's what updates are all about. That is the point of Minecraft. Well, not exactly. A feature has many layers to it, and here is a developer, Geggy Beans, talking about it just a little bit. Because in response to someone who says that adding a wood type is like a day's work, they say that the parts that take time aren't just adding the code. You're very correct in that adding the code for a wood set does not take long in itself, but following that comes a review process, ensuring parity between additions, iterating on art, etc. For just a wood set, it's still a pretty short process, but there's a lot more to the feature: world gen, new kinds of blocks/shapes, and even larger tech changes or refactors, each of which also takes more time from multiple people than just the time to write the code. In other words, Minecraft is a giant layer cake, and let's break down each layer of these features and talk in depth about it, because gameplay is of course the top layer of a feature and the end product of much work that gets put into the game and into players' hands to enjoy and play with. This is the equivalent of looking at a baked good in a bakery and saying, wow, this cake looks incredible, and that is the thing that is going to convince me to buy it. And with Minecraft, the example would be when you talk about archaeology as a feature in the Trails and Tales update, it consists of certain structures generating with suspicious blocks, which you can then use a brush on to uncover hidden artifacts. Sounds like a simple feature, right? Well, there's actually a lot more to it than that. A feature should probably be designed so it has some sort of purpose in the world and not just there doing nothing. It should feel like a cherry on a cake, and not like when I'm trying to meet someone and I'm not really sure how I should stand. Should you lean against the wall? Should you look at your phone? It's really hard to work out, and that is not how Minecraft features should be. So with the archaeology example, there are two parts that can be expanded: the part about structures and the part about artifacts. With structures, existing structures can be used, but also a new structure that really takes advantage of archaeology and the suspicious blocks can be added. This leads to the addition of trail ruins to provide a structure where players' archaeology skills are put to the test, and there is a lot of archaeology to be done there. With artifacts, that can be expanded into other features, such as they give archaeology more of a purpose in the game and make it more exciting and fun to do, such as with exclusive items you can only uncover through that feature. This leads to other features also being added, like the relic music disc, pottery shards, which then have to be crafted into decorated pots, and then some other exclusive armor trim templates and the integration of the sniffer mob from the mob vote to have it be obtained through archaeology. These features also aren't designed to just exist, they serve a secondary purpose of giving some more lore to the game. So now it's not just a feature, but a pretty decently sized system in the game that also ties into other features. And Kingsby Dogs says this perfectly, even archaeology isn't really one and done. Technically you can make plenty of combinations of pots, even just as a trophy reward to show on servers, and the fact that they are non-renewable means that having them is impressive on a big server. This is a decent reminder as well as proof that even a simple feature can become quite a lot more complex and require other features once it actually starts being added to the game. And to back that up, we have Xylephian, the tech lead for Minecraft Bedrock, who explains that gameplay design work for a feature isn't just for that one feature, but also how it can impact future features down the line. A feature might cause problems for features later down the road, in other words, and this is a very big deal on just the gameplay design front, but it goes a layer deeper because the technical foundation is something you also have to consider. A feature on its surface is just how it affects the gameplay in the game, but it also must be built on a technical foundation of some form, and this foundation is called a codebase. This codebase includes the game engine that helps Minecraft, like most other games, function in a standardized way that allows features to be added on top of it instead of each feature having to be fully developed from scratch. A codebase is a lot of work to maintain, which is key to ensuring that future features can not only be added, but added in a good way so that one, the feature actually works and so bugs in the feature's implementation can be minimized, and two, it doesn't conflict with existing features. This means that other features don't get new bugs that appear or old bugs that appear again, and three, the feature doesn't create problems with the game overall, such as performance, which can very negatively impact gameplay. Unfortunately, this stage is also where potential features can be postponed or cut entirely because the technical foundation cannot support it in a good enough way. When Mojang wanted to overhaul the entire terrain generation system for both the underground and the surface of the game, it was something that they were very much on track to doing, it seemed as though, until they got close to the performance stage of the update, where they realized that it was simply going to drain too many resources from too many devices, and so they had to split the Caves and Cliffs update into two halves so they could have some extra time to work on the technical challenge of actually making sure that they can not just have a bigger terrain and more exciting caves, but also so that this could run on most of the devices for the game. Interestingly, they do allow themselves some more headroom every few years, at least with the Bedrock version of the game. They discontinue some more devices. Most recently, iOS 13, or rather iOS 12 was cancelled, which means that you can't run Minecraft on an iPhone 5S or iPhone 6, and also you can't run it on a device with less than a gigabyte of RAM. I cannot believe people were doing that to begin with, but yeah, they do have to keep Minecraft running on all the devices it does right now, despite adding new features, which is a surprisingly complex task. But in either case, the idea of having a codebase with consistent standards is so that you can have all of these different things that Minecraft is going for be enforced while there are lots of different people who are working on the code. As Geggy says right here, a feature is not done immediately once it has been implemented in code. There is still a whole cycle of reviewing these changes, addressing the feedback, and making sure that it integrates with an ever-evolving codebase. Sometimes there are even dependencies on other teams or work, and a lot of time is spent to ensure the longevity of the game's codebase and platform. Mods generally have a very different surface area to work with, and most importantly, don't need to focus on this whatsoever. Modders, unlike Microsoft, don't have standards they need to keep to. If they decide that they want to use more RAM and so it won't run on devices with less than a gig and a half, unlike with Mojang where that's a disaster, they can just say, sure, people with those devices will just not download our mod, obviously something that Microsoft and Mojang cannot choose to do. And in case you think this is me putting words in modders' mouth, here is Irish Shaders, a modder, saying, pro tip, if you're not a modder, stop talking about how easy the game is to develop. We do so little work compared to them. Obviously, he has no incentive to say he does so little work unless he believes it to be true, and he even says, fun fact, if you go to the Mojang Discord, you can subscribe to see what Mojang's fixing in real time. This was 1 minute ago, showing 5 separate bugs that were fixed in that time. There is a lot of effort that is put into the base game, as we've kind of mentioned with the code base of things. However, there is another layer deeper than this, which most games don't have to worry about, and that is Bedrock and Java Edition. Because Minecraft doesn't have one technical foundation, it has two. Remember, Minecraft has 2 editions that it supports, Minecraft Bedrock Edition and Minecraft Java Edition. If your edition of the game says Java Edition, then it's the Java, and if it just says Minecraft, it's probably Minecraft Bedrock. This simplification ignores the Legacy console and the 3DS and the Raspberry Pi and all of these other weird versions of the game, but Minecraft tends to think of the game as being 2 separate code-linked games, which means means that whenever Minecraft is considering releasing something, they have two code bases they have to implement features on. And these code bases aren't the same as each other, they're actually very, very different. Firstly, both use different programming languages and frameworks, so the Java edition of the game is one of the very few things that is still developed using Java. That language is from 1996, it's so ancient, whereas the Bedrock version of the game is developed using C++, which is from 1985. Okay. Well, I mean, it's developed in a 1985 programming language. That is ancient in the grand scheme of things, and so they have to develop in two very differently set up coding languages, which might sound like a hard enough challenge by itself, but for another issue, there is also the fact that Bedrock Edition supports not just PC devices like Java does, but also mobile, VR, and console devices. Also Apple. I mean, it's technically included in the VR and mobile, but still, having to deal with iPhones and Android and Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft, well, that last one hopefully is easy. Thus, the technical foundation for one of the game's engines is even larger than the other, creating even more pressure and work for a feature to be implemented properly without introducing issues. Here is King B Dogs again, such a superhero of a communicator with the community, and he says that I think people vastly underestimate how challenging it is to work with a game that has two codebases being Java and Bedrock. You are basically in a process where you have to recreate the same feature twice every time. Mods do not have to do that, trust me. Literally, they do not. There are very few mods, you can count them on one hand, that exist the same between Java and Bedrock, and even then, they effectively can build the same vibe, but differently. But it's not just that, because it's time to introduce the concept of parity. A feature must not just work on each edition, but must act the same on each edition. This might not seem that difficult, but remember that each edition has its own technical foundation, and what might be easy to implement on one edition might actually be very different on the other. Thus, sometimes certain aspects of a feature have to be sacrificed in order for the feature to be delivered with complete parity. If you're like most players, where you only play one edition, this might seem pointless to you, as you only care about how a feature gets implemented on your edition, but Mojang is not in the business of catering to one player with Minecraft, and again, here's another fun tweet: we never plan for new features to arrive in Bedrock without parity. It's very important to us. This is from December of 2020, and it has come up a few times since then, something that is very important, but there's another layer below even this, which is all players. Hashtag not my players. Is that okay to say? Anyway, Mojang is in the business of catering to all players with Minecraft, but basically, Mojang's interests are in giving the best experience for all players of the game rather than a select group of people. So what else does this mean for a feature's implementation into the game? Well, it means all types of players have to get something with an update. Features aren't solely for one group of people, but an update is designed such that it can be enjoyed by all players. This can mean a variety of features for each type of player, but also designing some features in a way that can be enjoyed by different types of players. Take the upcoming 1.21 update, for example. It has quite the variety of features so far, with the crafter block being very useful for both survival and redstone players alike. And even if you're just creatively building, look how ridiculously great it looks. I love that it's the best looking block in 1.21. There's also the copper block, which is nice to use in builds, adds light to the trial chambers and to other structures, but also acts as a pretty useful block in redstone the first time you can probably store a redstone signal in a block. There's also the trial chambers structure, which adds a new dungeon experience for players looking for that sort of gameplay, along with a interesting new block, the trial spawner, that scales its difficulty and rewards based on the number of players around it, giving some additional value to multiplayer games over single player. The trial spawner as a block also has a lot of map making potential, with some custom content creators already making good use of it and looking forward to using it more. There is quite a lot of variety, therefore, in not only what the update is adding, but also what each feature is individually adding itself. This is a key part of Minecraft design philosophy, and it's one of the reasons why it's been many years since we got an update that was good for only one or a few groups of players, with every update focusing on reaching as many different types as possible. Whether that means adding some complex mechanics into every update, or whether that means having a silly mob that's friendly and you can just look at cat and wave and say, "Ah, isn't that cute?" Every type of every variety of Minecraft player, if they can be reached, are tried to by Mojang. However, there is another lower level than all of this, because after adding a feature and making sure that it works within the code base, both code bases mind you, and also making sure that it has different utility for different types of players, they also need to make sure that they actually go through phases of iteration, because a feature is never perfect. Once released into the hands of players, there is always the opportunity for players to give feedback. Because the player base is so large, there will be some that do not like certain aspects of a feature, because sometimes also the developers just get it wrong. Developers can make mistakes or just not realize that players might not like something, and indeed it's possible to have a perfect feature in theory that just doesn't work well in practice. And so it is important that iteration and feedback are used as a way for developers to change a feature after it is implemented so that it is more suitable for players. Incorporating feedback can also take a good amount of work, as developers also have to know first what the feedback is, which feedback to prioritize over others, as all sorts of feedbacks can come in from all sorts of players, and how to respond to that feedback. Then, once the feedback is acted upon, these steps have to be repeated so they can get feedback upon the newly feedbacked feature, creating a cycle of feedback which gets you to the point where you say, you know, is the word feedback even real? Why is it like that? Is it that Mojang are feeding us and we must feed it back to them? Very confusing. But anyway, there is another relevant tweet to reference here, which is this one from King B Dogs, where he talks about the difference between modding and developing as someone who has been on both sides, and he says something very interesting, which is that although modders can create things that Mojang spends months working on, this is kind of cheating, because getting to that point on ground zero from a design perspective where the content has been iterated and it's actually genuinely polished with dozens of iterations is never ever done in a week or even a month. That takes months of times to get to something that is truly worthy of being in an update on its own. This is the thing that people often skip over, is that an end feature might look really great and might have all of these other criteria met, but to even get there, it's important to go through lots of versions of it, because so many early versions of features looked significantly worse. Here is the early version of the Pillager, for example. I don't know if I love that. Here is an early version of the Strider. It looks nothing like the version we have. And here is an early version of the End Portal block. They all looked very strange because they were designed around a certain vision, but that vision just wasn't the perfect one for the game, something which they can work out by spending time on this. Additionally, as well as all of these, there is also the focus that Mojang has of update prioritization, because they do not just work on a single major update in a year. In fact, there are several updates the developers are working on for a year. These are the minor updates, each for Bedrock and Java editions, that add less than major content to the game, along with bringing some tweaks and doing lots of bug fixing. These minor updates can be quite minor, but they do comprise a good portion of the work that Mojang is doing as well. These minor updates are an opportunity to do things that may not necessarily be the focus of a major update, such as improving the technical foundation that goes into adding features so that future features can be added more efficiently, and adding some minor gameplay features such as the recent addition of storage to the decorated pot block, or the balancing of trading and the piglin brutes in 1.16.1, or the fill biome command in 1.19.1. That is just mentioning the Java version of the game, which does have its own creator community, but Minecraft Bedrock has to do a similar thing because Mojang needs to cater to all players, as gameplay isn't Mojang's only focus. They have players who want other things such as quality of life changes, fixing to lingering issues, and big creator features that would allow more customization of the game, which would allow them to have modders and people actually make content for them, and thus Mojang will actually have a different prioritization of features for each update. For minor updates, this means putting the most minor stuff forward, like tweaks and bug fixes, but for major updates, this means putting gameplay content at the focus to create a big major update for players to look forward to, and to hopefully actually change the game in some way that is worth talking about and sharing and promoting. So let's recap and go through the layer cake as we've seen it so far. Features are the actual feature in the game itself, like a block or item that does something in the player's world with perhaps more than one purpose to make it more useful, built on top of a codebase that requires maintenance so that the feature can be added in a good way and doesn't cause other problems with other features, implemented across 2 editions with as much parity as humanly possible, and sometimes designed such that not just one group of players can enjoy it, but multiple groups can. Features are then iterated upon to improve them, including with community feedback after a feature has been publicly released via snapshots and previews. And finally, there is update prioritization, where certain features are prioritized at a given time, whether it be minor technical features or changes for a minor update, or major gameplay features for a major update. So that's that's what Mojang is doing. Working more on all of the non-feature sides of each feature, which means they can spend a lot more time polishing on a given part of a game, but also so that they can plan out the future and not have things which obviously look wrong with a bit of hindsight. And indeed, if you think about how that probably never happens and how they never have to go back and change something, allow me to do a little bit of a fun interval in the video here of 10 things Mojang has definitely done wrong, but only with hindsight in mind. Here are 10 things they would have done differently if they were designing them today, in other words. So for this part of the video, I'm going to need to go into Mojang's offices so that you can see how, with current day knowledge, with the current understanding of Minecraft features, there's quite a few things that seem out of place and only stay the way they are because that's how they were before. And the first example of this would be the jack-o'-lantern. The jack-o'-lantern is crafted using obviously a carved pumpkin and a torch combined together. This made sense when a torch was basically the only small form of light, but doesn't it make so much more sense for it to be a candle in there? Well, candles are a little bit harder to obtain, and it would have been fine if they did it from the beginning, but now it would effectively be a balance change and a lot of people would be mad. So even though the candlelit dining opportunity could be done inside of a pumpkin, this is not possible anymore. By the way, doesn't it look really good when you put a sea pickle on top of a pumpkin? I really like that. Speaking of things I really like, I love desert temples. However, the standards for structures when they first introduced them was so low. It's just a big, weird square, basically, more or less. However, since then, they've made it a lot more interesting, and every structure they have now has lots of variations and different things like that. And so given that we have a mesa biome and a savanna biome, I'm sure that at least one of these biomes would receive one of the desert temples, or there would be a variant of some form in the desert, but most likely, I imagine we'd see a red sandstone pyramid, which would have a slightly different puzzle with a different way to go about it. This is a structure I'd love to make personally. I really do think, like, Minecraft structures are some of the coolest parts of the game, but they can't really go back and add it because when people expect a desert temple, they expect it to be one type, and they'd probably be more confused than pleased by a second or third type, which I think is sad. Speaking of sad, I think the way that waxing works is really intriguing because there should ideally be a way to wax concrete powder so that you can use it to make coral reefs, something which they would then in the next update make so appealing, 1.13. Would it be nice if you could make wonderful underwater areas? Well, you can't because there's no way to stop this from being waxed. Even though wax would later come out and be a great way to deal with copper, it hasn't really been applied to other mechanics in the game just yet. Next up, we've got animal cruelty. That's right, we have don't you be punching these guys, don't you be punching these guys unless you're hungry, and don't you be using these guys unless you have a particular penchant for getting achievements, because they genuinely have a full-on achievement from the 360 days, but still you'll find it in the Java and the Bedrock versions, for riding over 50 meters off a cliff on a pig. And isn't that crazy? Oh, I really should have expected there'd be some dripstone down there. Oh no! Well, that's sad. Speaking of sad, let's go back into the Mojang HQ. You know what? Dripstones are a wonderful thing. The fact that they're fairly recent means that that was unpredictable to me in the way it might be to the average Minecraft viewer if they were to put things there. By the way, this really is a whole office we put together here. It's got bathrooms. Look at this. This is nice, right? Speaking of things that are nice, next up, let's talk about chainmail. Chainmail was put into the game sort of as a weird behind-the-scenes feature, kind of like how the Illusioner is now, where you can access, or the Giant used to be, where you could access it, but it wasn't really meant to be. It was crafted with fire for the longest time, and now it is obtainable only through trading or rare loot. But let's be real, the way you would craft it, look, by the way, look, crafted with fire, very fun. But the way you would obviously craft it is using chain. We have chains in the game, but the chains came out long after chainmail and long after it had become a flex symbol as opposed to something a bit more, which is kind of sad. Speaking of kind of sad, minecarts. If they made minecarts today, they would be 3 times faster. There'd be more variants that could be more useful, but they didn't. They made minecarts back in 2010, and so they were very decent for the time if you could spend the money building them, but compared to a blue ice boat or an elytra, or even a decent horse, to be honest, they kind of are lacking, which is very, very sad. Speaking of sad, by the way, let's leave the dining room. This isn't a dining room, this is an office. There was a dining room over there, though, right? Yeah, let's leave the kitchen and the office, which could be the same room if you believed. And let's go upstairs, because this is a 10 list, and so let's show you number 7. You may want to fight me for saying this, but they wouldn't have designed combat the 1.9 way today. I really do believe Mojang of today is having a much harder time implementing a combat update because they want the community to agree on something. Is that for the better or worse? Actually is debatable. I think a lot of these features would be more immersive or better in some way. But when it comes to the new combat, it's a lot harder to be sure about. Speaking of things that are harder to be sure about, this is a fun room here too, by the way. Let's move on to number 8. I made you. That's right. I think the backpack system has been touted as something that's not really coming to Minecraft. I think if Minecraft had realized how powerful the shulker box was going to be, they might have brought it out in a less powerful form with some maybe upgrade to that later, because now these two items single-handedly make the end dimension worthwhile in a way that we haven't seen them go back to since. And so either they're trying to balance because it was so powerful, or they would have regretted making them so powerful to begin with. By the way, just a warning, there is a fletching table rant coming up, so keep that in mind. Speaking of keeping things in mind, let's talk about why are there mobs in the Mojang office? Let's talk about the end, shall we? The Ender Dragon is one of the weirdest parts of the game, and if we just assume that Mojang would have designed the end and the dragon the same today, one of the things I don't think that would have stayed the same, maybe I think we could even say definitely wouldn't have stayed the same, is how the end credits roll. They feel so weirdly not Minecraft in a way that I think was very funny to Notch at the time, and that the creator is still very mad about, to be fair. But yeah, the end poem and the end everything about it just feels weird. For a sandbox game to say the end and then say, you're back to it, is really, really odd. I think that Minecraft probably would not have designed an end if they were going to today, because if they didn't have an end for so long, people wouldn't have expected one. Speaking of expecting one, you aren't the bedrock beneath me. This is a interesting example of how a existing feature... Minecraft says they'll never mess with your existing worlds, but they had to. When 1.18 came out, they removed the bedrock underneath your world and replaced it with deep slate. I'm sure they would have just not placed some bedrock that way. Personally, that's what I believe. And finally, number 11, this is just me here, but I think if they had, I guess we could say this is a part of the combat, but I think that if Mojang were designing the arrow system today, crossbows and all that, I think that they would have designed the fletching table with a functionality to do with arrows. You wouldn't be able to make tipped arrows without it, for example, and I think that Mojang really is struggling to work out what to do with it. Something I can't imagine being too easy for them. Speaking of what they're doing with it, by the way, because it came out in 1.14, is still useless to this day, it might be interesting to look at the perspective of Mojang being lazy or just having to consider things that might happen in the future that they won't be able to undo. It might be interesting to look at this on an update-by-update basis, so let's move now into that, shall we? It would be reasonable to look at everything I just said and say, you know what, Mojang is doing a lot of unnecessary work when they could still just add a feature and be done with it. It would take so much less time to just add something and not worry about update sequencing, it's gone wrong in the past and hasn't ruined things, or not worry about parity, they've not done that in the past, and not worry about any of this other stuff, right? And yes, it would be much faster, but there is a very good big reason why Mojang does all of this, especially more so in the recent updates, and it's mainly to avoid problems, and especially the problems that have already happened. In this section of the video, the goal is to show you why Mojang is doing this, and we'll do so by looking at recent updates. We'll start with the update Aquatic, which is the start of the modern update development phase. It has a theme, a name, and big features, and we'll work forward from there all the way to the modern day to highlight some of the problems that each update had and why Mojang had to change their approach to updates since, because you would be entirely correct for saying that Mojang is doing a lot more work than they used to in terms of unnecessary behind the scenes stuff, but you might also quickly realize why it's not so unnecessary if we start with the update Aquatic. This was a dream when it was revealed, and when it released in July 2018, it was probably the biggest gameplay update that Minecraft had received in a very long time, with its main focus being on the previously lacking oceans. It also included a massive technical update for Minecraft Java Edition, but the fact that waterlogging was possible and so many new ocean biomes came to the game alongside new fish, turtles, and dolphins was something that almost almost everyone could get on board with. And I think it's fair to say that this was a big improvement in the form of an update, something I would say Mojang is still chasing to this day, because when compared to the previous update, 1.10 to 1.12 being good examples, this update had a much stronger theme with all of the features added focusing around a certain part of the game, in this case the oceans. Compare that to the Frostburn update or the Adventure update, which are nebulous themes which clearly fell apart and didn't resonate with people, and you can see that the update was much more massive, much more popular, and much better received by the community. However, a good update, one loved by the community, doesn't mean there are no problems, and this update is infamous for making Java Edition's performance nosedive. Because of the significant technical update, the game did run a lot slower and led to many users having a worse experience or not being able to play anymore at all. This update also had numerous parity problems, some of which were rather fun, such as Bedrock having these for the spawn eggs for a little bit, as opposed to the boring fish spawn eggs we ended up with, but also in the reverse direction, the update as a whole was split into 3 separate parts on the Bedrock Edition, and there are other parity issues that still linger to this day, such as the missing feature of banner markers on maps from the Java version. Additionally, here's another comment from developer KingBeDogs about the updated Quatex problems. He said that it was immensely bugly and one of our updates that had very low quality, many bugs after launch that took multiple entire updates to fix. With 1.20, we've had very little bugs and have kept the quality at a good bar. Although before we talk about 1.20, we of course need to move into the next update, the Village and Pillage, which was released in April of 2019 and was another big gameplay update, this time focusing on villages and villagers, but also adding some other features like new stairs, slabs, walls, and flowers. This update was a really well-liked gameplay update and made some big improvements. It was one of the most impactful updates that significantly changed how many people play single players, with villagers now being a core part of the gameplay, but this can also be perhaps a problem that you might already see coming. But this update also added a lot of features unrelated to villagers and villagers, such as brown mushrooms and suspicious stew, sweet berries and foxes, new stairs and slabs, as well as scaffolding, pandas, new cat variants, and flowers. Truly, it was an update that could be enjoyed by all types of players. It had this big, broad range of focusing a little bit on villagers and a little bit on the pillagers, but also adding a lot more for everyone else. However, on the problem side of things, like the updated Quatex, this worsened Java Edition's performance specifically for servers and also made parity even worse between Bedrock and Java. Another update split into parts for the Bedrock Edition. I remember that the stairs, slabs, and walls came out before everything else. Quite notably, the crossbow was a part of a different update, and the update was split into many different things on the Bedrock Edition, and the update also had some big balance changes, such as villagers being able to sell powerful enchantments like mending much easier. Something that was previously a treasure enchantment became farmable, and along with the totems when dying being obtainable through raids, which could be farmed, there was a significant movement towards making Minecraft easier in the mid to late game, and indeed, features that used to be cool and exciting and gave a breath of fresh air to these players and rewarded them for their efforts are now seen as par for the course, and indeed, there are serious balance concerns which people still rail on Mojang for to this day, and indeed, this is something Mojang are still trying to fix to this day, but also people don't want it nerfed, they just want the problem fixed without the symptoms being fixed too, something which is a disaster, which they've hopefully learned for, but we'll see, because the Buzzy Bees came out next, and this was a much smaller update released in December 2019. However, it did address the performance issues and gameplay bugs. In fact, it didn't just address bugs, it added new positive ones in. They're ridiculously huge and they're cute, and the whole theme of the update was around these guys, but this update also was very good for parity, with the update releasing completely at around the same time for both Bedrock and Java editions. So parity was on point, and so too were performance issues. However, the update had very little content for players to play with, and many were disappointed with the addition of features they wouldn't really use. This didn't have the broad support of players, because it really was a couple of technical players and people who thought bees were cute, and maybe a few new blocks for builders, but ultimately it was a small update which made people miss the old scale, which is why when the return to big updates came, with the Nether update released in June 2020, this was something the community applauded very loudly. This completely overhauled the Nether dimension with new biomes, blocks, mobs, music, and sound to give a greater purpose and life to an entire dimension. And the pros for this, I feel like we could take up a whole hour video for this by itself, but to summarize just how well of a received update this was, let's talk about how even to this day, people look back at it fondly and use it for comparisons with recent updates to point out the drop in quality and quantity for content. Imagine making something so good that everything you released afterwards is constantly compared to it, and people say, well, they could do better because they've proven they can. This update also made significant progress towards Mojang's goal of revamping the existing dimensions before adding adding new ones, which is one of the reasons that there are many players wanting an update to the end, that is the next logical step to them, but this update also did not introduce many new performance issues or parity issues and was generally implemented into the game quite well. Maybe being segregated into its whole new dimension was part of that, but it was absolutely great in terms of the implementation, and also the major version numbers became properly synchronized between Bedrock and Java editions as of this update. When we talk about 1.14, you might be confused because you might remember it as 1.9 or 1.12. However, from 1.17 and 1.18 forwards, there was a perfect synchronization between version numbers. And pro tip, if you want to know how this was achieved, there was never a 1.15 update for Bedrock, 1.14 was the Buzzy Bees, and 1.16 was the Never update, and we don't question what happened to that missing update, just like how you probably shouldn't question how they released such a good update, because sadly it seems as though this account from King B Dogs is that the Never update was one of the most stressful updates we've ever developed, so I do not think that it is a sustainable model. Extra features like basalt deltas weren't us just having extra time so we added it, it was us overworking to deliver more than we could. And ultimately, I mean, if you look at the Never update and remove the basalt delta, you would get an update which is still good on the level of village and pillage and the update aquatic for sure, but would still leave the Never feeling like it's just, oh yeah, a red forest, a blue forest, and a soul sand biome, and would feel just a little bit shorter on content. Indeed, to be critical about this update, it would be fair to say that because it focused almost exclusively on the Never dimension, there were not many features added to the gameplay outside of the Never, as you could probably expect, but this also meant that only a minority of players really get to experience it because most players never go to the Never, and still to this day have not. This is something they tried to fix with the Ruin portal, this is something they tried to fix in many other ways, and hopefully a lot of players went to the Never for the first time, but there are lots of players who probably didn't get very much in the year 2020, which is a shame because, you know, it was such a good year otherwise that it's a shame that Minecraft couldn't keep up. Oh, was it not a good year otherwise? Let's talk about the Caves and Cliffs then, which was the most anticipated update ever released by Mojang. Everyone was yelling for a cave update for so long, caves had been boring forever, and you know what Mojang did? Those mad lads actually decided to release a cave update and combine it with the cliffs that people had asked for at the mob vote the year prior. This was going to be the update that made 1.16 look small, and thankfully there were no major events that happened this year, and so I can talk positively and say that this update was heavily requested by the community for a long time. I can say the update brought more parity to Bedrock and Java, and that the update brought a lot more things that could be enjoyed by all sorts of players. Builders loved the world height increase, explorers loved the new terrain, modders loved the fact that they could play around with all of that new terrain much more and it would work in a more consistent way. Map makers could use it for all sorts of wild things of custom biomes, and vanilla survival players got all sorts of new gameplay features and quality of life added to the game. Indeed, the new cave biomes were meant to be just as revolutionary as the new Never biomes, but with the combination of all of the overworld changes, this was an update to be truly enjoyed, except it came with a few downsides, the biggest of which you're quite aware, because I didn't say 1.17, it's actually 1.17 and 1.18, because this update was split into multiple parts. By itself, this was widely criticized by the community. They ruined the hype of the update by trying to split it into two parts, one of which had all of the gameplay features, which could technically be accessed in weird ways like the Wandering Trader, and the other half had all of the terrain, which would have made it wonderful, but by themselves they both felt like half updates, and indeed you might argue even less than half updates, because the update added to the huge backlog that Mojang already had, because not all of the features announced for the update could make it into either half, and so really you kind of have three separate thirds of the update, 1.17, 1.18, and the rest is slowly being delivered even to this day. I don't think I'm alone in seeing that the trial chambers, being an underground focused structure, probably came from the Caves and Cliffs original plans, and so this means that if Mojang had some specific reason they needed them, they have to dedicate a lot of 1.19, 1.20, 1.21, and maybe even future updates to some of their plans for this one. This leads to the community calling it Caves and Cliffs Part 5, and also leads to a hugely increased backlog, which is why when 1.19 rolls around in June of 2022, the Wild update, and adds the delayed Deep Dark biome, which was expanded to include a new ancient city structure, the Warden mob, and increased biome diversity with the new mangrove swamp and frog mob from a previous year's mob vote, people look at this and say, okay, you've delivered something that you said you would, but where are the new features this year? And so even though this update made good on the promise of updating a losing biome from a previous year's biome vote and included a massively expanded Deep Dark, here is the original Warden cabin. This was all the ancient city was originally going to be. This tiny little box became this massive structure, the biggest in Minecraft's history, and so this was a big update if you were to try to look at it objectively, but that's not how the Minecraft community see things, and so that is a problem for this update. Add to that the other development problems, which led to some features being cut, specifically the announced Firefly mob, 2 pixels, no more pixels for us, and also the mentioned update to the Birch Forest shown in this concept art, causing disappointment in the community over these cut features. Additionally, the update's main focus was delivering the Deep Dark and the Warden, which had previously been announced for the Caves and Cliffs update, and gave players an impression that the update didn't really add anything new besides already promised things. To lose out on 2 of these new features after feeling like the update was mostly just previously promised things led to a very, very big movement against Minecraft updates really being a waste of time, and arguably this is the birth of the Mojang lazy movement, something which was maybe made worse with 1.20 released in June of 2023. We're getting very close to the present now. Tales and Trails focused on players' self-expression and intrinsic motivation, along with adding features that took players on a journey in their world. This update has the objective biggest upside of not overpromising, and in the small print of how they did that, it's by not promising very much. They only showed features that were further along in the development process than others, especially those that were ready to be previewed in snapshots and, well, previews fairly soon. This also led to features being announced as surprises after the fact. This was very well received. I do still remember the excitement that came with the Cherry Grove biome actually coming to the game, and so the development process of the Minecraft updates also shifted with this update. It's not just how they announced things that changed, it was also how they were going to release things. Previously, at least specifically for the Java edition, they had to either pick to work on something like 1.20.1 or 1.21. It was very hard for them to split focus in that way, but in this update they managed to do both at the same time, with these smaller features being able to go into the released updates as they went along. Basically, the Java version of the game switched to being developed more like the Bedrock version, and it led to big improvements all round. And finally, compared to previous updates which focused on gameplay and extrinsic goals, this update focused a lot more on decorative features and intrinsic goals, which played into the sandbox nature of the game. For so long, Minecraft had been making the sandbox wider and wider. This was their first attempt at making it deeper, and honestly, it does stick, in my opinion, in the long run for that reason. However, there are problems again, and as you can imagine, given this is where we are, these problems are kind of quite deep. One of them is that due to less features being initially announced for this update, the excitement level of it was significantly lower than we've seen in the community. When 1.20 came out, it was more of a yay than a yeah, this is incredible. And since this update focused more on intrinsic goals, players who'd gotten used to gameplay altering, progression adding updates like Village and Pillage and Never updates were feeling disappointed and confused as to why this update felt so little. Again, you had to kind of explore for yourself and create the content in this update, which, you know, telling a game developer telling you to make content, that sure sounds like you could criticize someone for being lazy in that way. And finally, this update was criticized for not doing more to flesh out some of its features, such as the Sniffer mob, which was called lackluster and really had 2 plants, which admittedly Mojang promised plants. You can say that 2 plants is plants, you can say that 1 plant is plants if there's lots of copies of it. And so when you take that all and add to it the bamboo block set, which is just a new type of wood to many people, but it comes with a bamboo raft. This is crafted from the new wood type. It looks different to every other boat so far, and so it must do something really exciting, new and different. I actually wrote down what it does right here. Oh, it's absolutely nothing, actually. It's just a reskin on the boat. When you look at many of the features in the 1.20 update, they are kind of exciting for players who like visually interesting things, but for players who'd gotten used to extrinsic updates, to players that had gotten used to the idea that the game should grow wider and bigger and add more, it looks like they've just decided to phone it in. And although that isn't true, and hopefully this video has proven it, hopefully this shows the perception on why that is, and also this shows why perception is ultimately more important than reality when it comes to the community's reaction to updates. If you think about it, the amount of content in an update is not actually what people are measuring. In fact, measuring a Minecraft update is very, very hard, so you basically have to do it on, to be honest, vibes. The vibe-based Minecraft check is what the community has been doing, and Mojang has been coming up short on that one. And this is why ultimately it is about the community's perception more than anything else, because the amount of development work that goes into an update can correlate so poorly into the number of features as it is, but then when those features aren't even measurable, it comes down to what does the community feel about an update? And so 1.21, to very briefly talk about it, even though it's not out, is an update that is returning to being more gameplay focused, a brand new structure that is a dungeon-like experience. Sounds pretty great. Lots of the features are multi-purpose, and indeed they are following the same approach that Tales and Trails is, which is using the less than major features being relegated to minor updates, while the major features are all coming together in 1.21. The developers had said the change in development started with Tales and Trails was more beneficial to them, and so this will give them flexibility in shaping the update and utilizing community feedback. That all sounds very good. However, since they're using the same announcement strategy, where only features close to completion are announced, the excitement level of this update is still currently low, with many players wondering where Mojang will take this update, or if they're going to take it anywhere at all. If you had someone working on something that you were excited about and you saw nothing for months in a row, you might start to conclude that they're not doing anything, even though lots of work isn't very public facing. And so looking at this, we can see that updates started out very grand and very large, with lots of new gameplay stuff added for the game. However, we can see the first couple of updates had problems that we can describe as pretty big, such as performance and parity, and so it's been many years now, but parity isn't just something Mojang came up with as its own goal. It was originally born from the community, as people were not happy about having to wait longer on some platforms for features to arrive there. This was mostly between the consoles and the Java version, and I mean, they technically solved it. It was a very roundabout way, and to avoid going on a whole console rant, we can say that yeah, parity was a community concern, performance was a community concern, and so after 1.13 and 1.14, they decided to pull back a bit on the content to address some long-standing issues, which is why they brought out the Buzzy Bees update. Then they released what many call the perfect update in the Nether update, which was great because it expanded many gameplay areas like the Nether and the game's progression with Netherite gear and Bastion remnants, which is a very difficult structure with very difficult mobs for players to clear. However, despite addressing performance and parity and bugs in a decent way, this update wasn't actually perfect because it's been stated by a developer the Nether update required them to overwork just to deliver all of the features they wanted. This might not seem obvious because you think all they're doing is adding stuff, but that's the main point of the video. Mojang is doing more than adding stuff. They're trying to add stuff in a good way so problems of previous updates aren't repeated. They don't want to be seen as a company that are staying in the same track regardless of what comes from it, because that will add more and more problems to the game, more and more technical debt, more and more performance issues, and more bugs, which is something that Mojang still gets slack for, while also being called lazy for not adding more features, even though they could add more features if they cared less about bugs, which is something that you would perhaps want them to care about. It's an ultimate, there's a spectrum there, and people are not happy with no matter where they're going to land. However, after that, Caves and Cliffs came out, where developers sought to go even bigger, and the plan for Caves and Cliffs was so massive and ambitious that we still have not gotten all of the features from that original announcement. Given the Nether update caused the developers to overwork, it's clear that the Caves and Cliffs would cause that again, and so by not addressing it, they led to a big split from this update, which led to even more community backlash. And so then the community said, we want to see all of the features delivered at once. We don't want to see weird rump updates and half years and all of this stuff. And so the Wild update was planned basically to pare things down, to have a scope that was smaller than previous updates, but that was much more likely to be delivered all in one piece as the community said they wanted, and also to be delivered without performance concerns, which the community said they wanted, but also to implement tricky features like the Warden and Ancient Cities the same on both platforms, and to have parity as players have said they wanted, especially people who watch one edition on YouTube and play the other. People have suggested all of these things and the bugs and all of this stuff, and then when they deliver the update, the biggest concern is that there were a couple of features that they did announce in the early days of it that didn't make it to the end phase of the update. And so then with 1.20 and 1.21, Mojang looks at that and say, okay, we're going to work on having a deliverable scope, we're going to work on making sure it's got parity, and there are bugs and there aren't long-term implications on future development so that we don't have to miss any future updates. We're going to make sure that we don't announce any features we don't deliver, so we're going to work on the announcement schedule to try and make sure that brings as much hype as possible. And by trying to put out all of these fires at once, Mojang ends up in a position where it looks like actually they're just not doing very much. If by trying to be realistic about achieving all of these goals and when they can do it by, Mojang just looks like they're not trying to achieve very much, because maybe sometimes now people expect you to try and massively overpromise and then desperately try to deliver as much of that as you can, whereas Mojang tries to be very realistic about delivering features that have enough time time to be polished and bug fixed and not have the risk of overwork and splitting of updates, and that leads to them seeming like they are unambitious. This is something I think we can all notice somewhere in our lives, where if you are realistic about what you're going to do in a time frame, it seems wildly unimpressive. However, life does have a lot of different things that you have to do all at the same time, and I can't help but invoke a YouTube analogy here. This is something I do day in, day out on this channel, which is my full-time job, and so one of the things I've done over the past few years is try to make videos that are more informative, that are better edited and visually are more interesting, while also trying to make sure at the same time that we get better information density and cover more interesting topics and hopefully make videos that leave you with more of an impact. And so doing all of that stuff, making better videos, means not only spending more of my time and also people like Harrison and Ash editing this stuff, but not only spending more time on all of the different elements of it, but spending a lot more time to make fewer pieces of content. On the one hand, I can say I'm really proud of what we're making right now, and on the other hand, I can say, look how lazy you are, Toy Cat. You used to make 2 videos a day, and like 6 when an update would come out, and now you just make 1, and sometimes you don't even upload in a day. You're so lazy. You call this your full-time profession, but you're not even doing it every single day, and then the financials will back that voice in my head up, right? Because making fewer videos means getting fewer views overall because there's less surface area. It is a very scary thing as a creator to focus on quality, and the fact that Mojang has this luxury is something I can look at and from my perspective say, okay, if they are trying to go for a balanced approach and then kind of regroup and make sure they do things the right way, then maybe they'll be able to effectively scale up from there, as opposed to the previous strategy of just, scale up at whatever speed happens, and when there are flaws, try and fix those flaws. It's a interesting difference in philosophy, but the question is that actually what Mojang should be doing? And I'm glad you asked, because new chapter. Everything we've discussed so far in this video will make it look like Mojang has learned from previous updates, and now with updates like Trails and Tales 1.21 and 1.22, they'll solve all of these problems, right? Well, actually, I don't think that's true. Nothing is ever perfect, and so it would be fair to say that Mojang is also included in that, and so there is always room for improvement. Let's talk about problems with their current approach, because although it is born out from actually listening to the community, maybe too hard, the biggest problem in what's going around in the community is that there is a current feeling of lack of content. Recent updates and future updates will always be compared to the Update Aquatic and the Never update, and these were considered to be great updates and were done by Mojang, and so they're always going to need to keep in mind that this is the bar for quality that some people expect, but not just in terms of quality and quantity, but also in terms of what they did more specifically. They were strongly themed updates, they completely overhauled big areas of the game, and they added useful features specifically for the progression of the game. Compare the Netherite upgrade that you can get in 1.16 to all of the other smithing trims they added in the Tales and Trails, and many players were disappointed that although there was a lot of content in all of the new trims, ultimately they just didn't add much to the progression of the game because they're solely cosmetic. All of the armor trims sound like they are incredible new features, and they really give you 16 different paths to take your Netherite armor down instead of just the one path that you had before. However, because they're all cosmetic, they don't succeed in Mojang's stated goal of trying to make the sandbox deeper, because there is no real reason to seek a cosmetic. Even though Minecraft has all of its goals in the cosmetics and what you build, ultimately it always feels like there is a game under there and not just a bunch of skins that you have to collect. This is something that I do think was a big miss in the 1.20 update, and so with the upcoming 1.21 update, I think there are similarities in players' response. It is adding a new structure that doesn't have anything particularly useful in terms of the actual progression of the game, nor does it actually affect the game in any meaningful way. There are fun items and it is a fun challenge, but a lot of players look at it and say, that's cool that it exists in the world, it adds some more depth to the world, quite literally in some places, but does it really give you a reason to want to jump back in and play Minecraft in a different way? That is what I think a lot of people get from the Never update, for example. So why is this happening with newer updates? Well, we've discussed that already about how Mojang is trying to avoid problems that can come with new features due to problems encountered from previous updates, but is this what Mojang should be doing? Well, Mojang certainly seems to think so, but perhaps not, because although there are benefits to this approach, most of that comes from the fact that streamlined development means that there is less time spent redeveloping a feature when there are bugs in the game, also less bugs in the gameplay, and also updates which are going to come out less likely to be split and aren't going to be delayed, and there's going to be a more consistency in the content that you do receive. There is the big other side of this, which is that actually players just look at it and say there is a lack of content, and you can criticize them all you like. I can go through all of the reasons in this video, but it doesn't matter what I think or what someone who follows Mojang as closely as maybe you watching this video thinks, because the base player, the average person, looks at it and says the amount of work that Mojang outputs has gone down, and that isn't an entirely invalid concern. Even though the features are coming out in a more sustainable way, even though those features are coming out in a way that matches all of their other goals, matching these goals clearly is costing them in the overall content department. And so this is the actual problem that Mojang needs to address. Players are saying that we are not making enough content, rather than trying to justify why, instead try to actually address the concern. And so there are a few ways you can do this. You can look at the Nether update and the update aquatic and say, actually what people like is not the number of features. I don't think anyone could perfectly number the features in even that update, but instead the vibe that there were lots of them. And so what creates that? I think one of the biggest things is that it was all themed around the same set of features, and so when you went into an ocean in the update aquatic or the Nether in the Nether update, it felt like a whole new world. It felt like there were more features, because instead of being scattered around the entire world like in Tales and Trails, or even split between just a few different areas like in the Wild update, it was all found in one place and it created a sense of wonder. I think the other important thing is also focusing on progression. Even though Minecraft has one of the most complicated tech trees of any game out there, it is still something they can continually add to in interesting and ideally sustainable ways. This is something they should be focusing on, not just fun cosmetics here or not just a fun option over there, but a real reason to do these things. You need to give players reasons, because although they are creating their intrinsic motivation, you still need to give them something extrinsic to want to aim for, to get back into the game, to be excited to get back into the game, and to be excited to create their own motivations from. That seems really backwards, but it's how the world works too, right? Like, the reason you are doing anything, including watching this video, is something only you know, but it was created by some external factors, whether that's something as, close to you as the YouTube algorithm, or what you're currently feeling, happy, sad, in the mood for a big Minecraft video essay, a far too long one too, by the way, or whether that's because of the people in your life, your friends, your family, maybe your boss, maybe the people and the corporations that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Maybe it's that led to you being in the mood for this video right now, but there is some reason inside of you that had to be paired with those outside reasons, or you wouldn't have found this video. Without the YouTube algorithm, without having the time for YouTube and this TV or phone or console or whatever you're watching this on, you would not be able to watch this, and that is something that every Minecraft update needs to consider too. Not all of the player, not all of the motivation can come from the player, but instead some of that motivation is always going to be external, and Mojang needs to focus on that. So that is path number one. They can look at their previous successes and try to theme things around that. And so I would say the biggest and easiest way for doing this is honestly look at Caves and Cliffs, which was delivered in 2 parts, but otherwise was the most hyped update, was going to be even bigger than the Nether update, and say the thing it did so great was it updated something lots of players wanted and also focused very well into one area of the game. And so what could be a logical improvement to a huge area that could all feel new all at the same time? Well, I think if done right, an end update by Mojang would for sure make players more excited in the game again and bring back players who might have left due to recent updates. Another thing Mojang could do though is just simply make their current development process more efficient. This is much harder to make any intelligent comment on, because unless you are the CEO of Mojang, that they do have a CEO even though they're inside Microsoft, by the way, but unless you are working in the extreme innards of Mojang, you don't know exactly what about the process has slack and where they could hire people to do these things, or where there are people who are actually excited to do more than they are right now and would do so for the right motivation in terms of money or recognition, or, again, there is a lot of micro decision making that they could work on, but they could just improve the development process. Most games and most products should get more efficient at adding things over time, you would expect, as opposed to less efficient, which is what the end community is seeing. And so if they could do their exact same current process and exact same strategy of scattering features over everywhere around around a kind of loose and nebulous theme to make sure it's deliverable. They could just add more features in the same time frame, but to me that seems a lot harder than just focusing and working out what the successes were before, delivering those same successes but to a higher quality standard with a higher set of deliverables and indeed a more direct sense of what the community wants could be a winning combination. In other words, how could Mojang improve? Well, I think they could either focus on efficiency and improvements to the entire process of how fast they can make things, or they should focus on a themed update, and let's just be honest, they should make the end update. Everyone agrees on that anyway. This has been a whole video just to lead you to this point, but outside of the end update, why should you care? A good rule of thumb is that productive discussions generally lead to better things actually happening in the world rather than arguments and debates where people just get angry at each other. Those might feel more satisfying to have, but in general, even the Minecraft developers have said that constructive feedback is so much more useful to them, as you can see right here. It is a good idea to be more informed about things rather than staying misinformed for the sake of easiness, and also being open to other perspectives, as you might be surprised with some of the information you learned from this video that you didn't know previously. The point is, criticism should be constructive and informed, and as you will get better results with that, it's important that if you want to make a difference in some way, if you want to share your feedback on something, you do so productively and in a way that actually has as much knowledge behind it as possible, so you can address issues not that have been solved 7 years ago, but that actually still do need to be solved today. And so hopefully you learned a lot from this talk about how Minecraft is developed and what Mojang might actually be working on, which might not be what you expected. Don't take this as fact. Like I said, this is just based on the outside opinion and based on what they've said. They genuinely might just be putting their feet on the table at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and saying, you know what, lads, let's have a 6-day weekend again. Again, that's not impossible. I don't work at Mojang, so I can't confirm, but I do think it's much more likely, based on everything you've seen so far on this video, that actually Mojang are trying too hard, that actually Mojang are putting all of these efforts into solving problems from years ago, but at the same time, despite all of that effort, they haven't solved the biggest problem that they have as a company right now, and that is their community of hundreds of millions of players looking at an update that takes them a full year to develop and saying, meh, not enough content. I think they're being pretty lazy right now. And if you work really, really hard on something and people look at it and say, that didn't take much effort, that is a problem too. And so don't take this as fact. Like I've said, there are lots of things that can't be known for certain, but I can make some inferences, and these are my ones. What do you think about this all? Let me know, because I hope that for now you have a different perspective and you can judge Minecraft development and its updates, and hopefully you have it too. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you to KMB for being a researcher on this video. Again, one of the things in making these videos high quality is in actually reaching out and seeking people's help, not just in the editing, but in finding a lot of these tweets and references to developers, because rather than just saying what I've picked up over the years, I think it is useful to have some sources to back it up. And so thank you so much to KMB. He is a member of the community a lot of you might recognize, and thank you to all of you for watching. This has been one of the longest video essays yet. I am sure we won't be going this long again, because thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.